Welcome to episode 1 of the ADI Part 1 podcast with me, Josh Holleran, and Craig Preedy. Before we get on to the podcast and what the next few episodes are going to be about, we will introduce ourselves so that you've got a bit of a background on us and kind of our thoughts on things. So first off, we will go with Craig. Craig, would you like to give us a bit of your background as a driving instructor?
Yeah, so I'm Craig Preedy. I've been a driving instructor for 20 years, a very long time, longest I've ever held a job for. Um, my pathway into becoming a driving instructor is like many people, I think. It was through redundancy, not really knowing what to do. A friend of mine was training as an instructor. I thought that's a good idea. I'll do that. And I very quickly found a school local to where I was living at the time that was offering some training, investigated it, managed to get a grant and use some redundancy money towards the payment for it as well, and started my training. Since I've qualified, I've tried to improve my skills. I didn't really just want to be your normal ADI. I've done the Institute of Advanced Motorist test. I've done the ROSPA Advanced Driving test. I've done teaching qualifications. I've qualified as a hypnotherapist. I've done things that I feel are going to enhance my role as a driving instructor. On top of that, I've trained in the corporate market as well as in the learner driver market as well, helping and supporting people in both of those areas. So that's just a little bit about me for the moment. And I'm sure that as these podcasts progress, you'll find out a lot more as well.
Nice. So my story as an ADI is not quite as exciting. I qualified just over 3 years ago, and I went independent straight away. And since qualifying as an ADI, I started a different podcast where I got to talk to a lot of different people from industry kind of trainers to PDIs and newly qualified ADIs. And something that's stood out since then for me and for a lot of people I've spoke to was the part 1 training. And it took me 3 attempts. I failed twice on the part 1 and I've passed third time. So my training was with a national school, and then I decided not to go on a PDI license and just go straight for the part 3, having taught for free. So that's a little bit about me and my backstory with the part 1. And the purpose with the podcast and the next few episodes is to hopefully help some people understand the part 1, what it is, and how we can help. So how do you think the episodes are going to help people, Craig?
Well, I think that you and I both come at this from two different perspectives, don't we, in terms of how we did our part 1s. So you've been very much a part 1 of the digital generation, and I am a part 1 of pre-digital generation. So we've got two different approaches here, which I think is going to be hugely valuable to the people that are listening to this, and maybe do a course that we might run later in the future. But I feel like for me, I want people to have a resource that they can go to, which gives them the support that they need, that enables them to not just ask a question and expect an answer, but to go and look for the answer themselves. And we're not going to ignore people. We want them to feel like they're getting the support, but we want to give them a nudge in the right direction as to where they can find the answers themselves. After all, it's what we're going to be getting our learners to do. So we need to be starting to do that ourselves right at a very early stage.
That's what I struggled with. I can't blame anyone, but that's why I feel I failed my first 2 part 1s. The digital age, I jumped straight on an app, passed a couple of mock tests, and went for my part 1 and failed. It wasn't by a huge amount, but it wasn't a pass. And some of the questions, I just didn't really know where to look. And I had all of these books, all of this content. And initially I was sat there like, I'm not going to read all of this. I'll just use an app. I'll be all right. And I think had I have had some kind of guidance on what book to read for what information would have helped me a hell of a lot to prepare for the part 1. And as we're going to discuss in later episodes, how that would have helped prepare me for part two and then on to my part three, and even later down the line to where I am now, trying to help my students with their theory test. It's one thing being able to tell them the correct answer on their apps that they're using, but I feel if we can provide more in-depth knowledge of the theory for our learners, we're providing a better package as a driving instructor. But on that difference between what you had qualifying and what I had qualifying, how did you find your preparation for part one?
I really enjoyed the process. It had been a while since I'd been in a learning environment, so I needed to retrain my brain really on how to learn again. I had great support from my trainer. I was very lucky. He wasn't in it just for the money for him. He was in it to help me and get the best out of me. I feel I was directed to where I needed to be going in terms of the books, but not enforced to read them all, but instead directed to particular chapters within books or particular rules within the highway code. I had regular one-to-ones and assessments with them over a period of about 3 months, and I was ready to take my part one after that length of time. And I'm really pleased to say I passed first time. I got 99 out of 100, and I am going to brag about that. As annoyed as I am about not getting one right, I'm still really chuffed I got 99%. But something you said really sticks with me as well is how much it helped me prepare for part two and part three. During the course of my part one revision and practice, I learned quite a lot about what to expect from part two and what to expect from part three. Now, part three has changed somewhat over the years since I did it, and we're now much more in a client-centered role than we were back then. It was very much you can teach, but I've never been one to teach. I've always been pretty client-centered anyway because of my previous background. Um, but I feel like a lot of PDIs coming into the industry underestimate the value that the part one can give them when it comes to part two and part three. As an example, I've got a number of PDIs, of which one of them said to me recently, I just wanted to get part one done and I just want to get part two done so I can get onto the meaty stuff, which is part three. And now in part three, realizing that actually had they spent more time on part one, they would have benefited hugely right now because they're struggling in certain aspects. So that's okay. I'm there to support, but part one prepares you for more than just passing and getting 85% on a part one test. It's more than that.
That was exactly my mindset as I was starting the process. It was almost part one, let's just get that done, tick that off, move on to part two. That's done, pass, great. Now I can learn to be a driving instructor. But I feel had it have been sold to me that the part one is like the foundations, the fundamentals of being a driving instructor, I may have given it more time rather than it just being a hurdle before I could get on to the exciting stuff. So I do think there's a lot of importance on the part one that we can maybe miss and we're looking past it when in reality they're all linked. And that's what we're going to be covering over the first kind of 5 to 10 episodes of this podcast is exactly that. We'll go into some detail on the part one, how it is then linked to the other parts of the qualifying process, and then beyond passing your part three and how it can help. So stay tuned for future episodes. If you would like any more information on what me and Craig are up to, you can head to our Facebook page or our Facebook group, and they're both available at ADI Part 1 Podcast. And from there, we will also be releasing the information on our course to help you get through the Part 1, and then also offering support throughout the process and beyond once you're an ADI. So make sure that you subscribe, stay tuned, and I will look forward to seeing you soon.
Brilliant. Me too.